Driving around Hastings, you might see some of these bee boxes or beehives. That means honey. Whether it's in a jar, a bear, or even an elephant, honey season is just around the corner. The bees might not be buzzing, but the recipes are cooking. So let's head to my house and see what we can come up with this month. The first recipe that we're going to make today using our honey is no-knead honey bread. This recipe is perfect if you love homemade bread, but you don't like letting it rest, knead a little bit, let it rest, knead a little bit. So we're gonna start with 2 1/4 cups of hot water. Make sure it's hot but not boiling, because we are going to add yeast to this. We're gonna add a tablespoon and a 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. If it's too hot, it's gonna kill that yeast. And then we're gonna add the same amount of salt to that. Then I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna stir this all together just gently to start activating that yeast. And you know you're doing it right if you get goopy on your swoopy, no, goopy on your spoon. And so then, we're just gonna let that sit a moment, and in this I have 4 3/4 cups of flour. And now we're gonna come in with our honey. In our honey bowl, we have 1/3 cup of honey, so I'm gonna scoop that into my flour while my yeast and salt just starts to activate. Some bread recipes, it'll make you let that yeast sit in there for maybe 5 minutes or so, but with this, you don't have to take that time to do this. So now I'm simply going to add my water, my yeast, and my salt. I'm gonna make sure I get all of the yeast that might have stuck to the sides of the bowl. And now what I'm gonna do is just work to combine all of this together. And you'll start to see that without very much stirring at all, it's gonna turn into a dough ball rather quickly. And you want this to be a dough ball that's still a little loose and stringy. It doesn't need to be perfectly bound together, because after we get this all combined, we're gonna let it sit on our kitchen counter for 2 hours. And by doing that, it's really gonna let that yeast begin to activate, and we're gonna get almost double the size of our dough. So you're gonna wanna do this in a large bowl. Don't try and cram it into the smallest one in your cupboard just so you can save space in your dishwasher later. Now we're gonna pull up ye old sleeves, and we're just gonna work it together with our hands to make sure that we get any last little bit of flour that may have stuck to the bottom of our bowl. So now that it's all nice and combined, the last thing we're gonna do before we put it on our kitchen counter to rise for 2 hours is to cover it up with a cloth. Some dough recipes, it'll ask you to have a damp cloth, but me, doesn't need to be damp, it just needs to be our lucky pizza towel. This honey mustard chicken is fantastic. If you're one of those people that likes to get your chicken nuggets or your chicken strips and dip it in honey mustard, then this is the recipe for you. Whenever we go to restaurants, I always pick the honey mustard option instead of the barbecue sauce option. So obviously we're gonna need to start with our honey. So in here, I have about 1/3 cup of honey. It's a little goopy, just like honey should be. And then to that honey, we're going to add some Dijon mustard. And we want equal parts of honey to equal parts mustard. And then we're gonna start combining that. I am going to add a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. If you've never bought apple cider vinegar before, it's gonna be in the same aisle that you get your white vinegar. And then, it smells good already. So then to that, I'm going to add a teaspoon of rosemary. It can be fresh or it can be dried. Just remember though that if you're going with dried rosemary, it's gonna have more of a pungent flavor. So in my bowl, I actually had just under a teaspoon of rosemary because I didn't want it to be rosemary chicken. I want it to be honey mustard chicken. So then I'm gonna add 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and now I'm simply going to stir to get that all nicely combined because you don't want to have one flavor overpowering the rest in there. And then I'm gonna put this on top of chicken breasts. I have boneless, skinless chicken breasts, but you can put it on top of whatever type of chicken you'd like. So I have 5 boneless, skinless chicken breasts here, and I have a 9x13 pan, and in the bottom what I've done is I've coated it with a piece of parchment paper so that nothing gets sticky and crusty and then dishes take a long time later. I've already got enough honey bowls that I'm gonna be cleaning out this time. And I'm just going to position my chicken breasts into my pan so that they're nice and nestled together and I can fit all 5 of them in there. 5 might seem like a weird number to some of you if you buy the 2 packs of chicken breasts, but if you buy a family pack, there's usually 5 chicken breasts in there. So I have my last of my 5 chicken breasts in the pan, so now I'm gonna wash my hands before we put our honey mustard sauce on so we don't worry about our bowl or our brush or our pan getting contaminated with salmonella. So now I just have my basting brush and I'm gonna go over each of the chicken breasts, and I'm going to start by putting a base coat of my honey mustard sauce onto each of my chicken breasts. And then after each of my chicken breasts gets a coating of this, I'm going to pour the rest of the sauce over the top. Now, while it's in the oven, I'm gonna check on it about every 15 minutes, and I'm gonna check and see to make sure that the chicken breasts are still coated. If one looks like it's starting to dry out, I'm gonna use this same brush and I'm gonna pull up some of this honey mustard sauce and rebase that chicken breast. So now I'm just gonna pop these chicken breasts into a 350-degree oven for about 40 minutes or so. I'm gonna check it with a meat thermometer to make sure that the chicken's done, and then our honey mustard chicken will be ready to go. So we have our honey bread getting ready to go. We have our honey mustard chicken in the oven. So let's make our Mediterranean honey salad. So we're gonna start by making the dressing, and to do that, we're going to take a 1/4 cup of olive oil. And to that, I am then going to add 3 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. And it's gonna look a little bit like a lava lamp, but that's okay. And then this is when we're gonna start adding some of that Mediterranean flavor. We have 2 teaspoons of oregano, and then we have a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and let's get our honey in there. We have a tablespoon of honey. And now we're just gonna stir this all up to combine it. And it's gonna look really concentrated, obviously, because nothing else is in there yet. So now, in order to make this salad, we're going to start by getting some of our vegetables ready. So we're gonna start with a cucumber, and we're going to dice up our cucumber. If you have a large cucumber, you probably only need about half of a cucumber. If it's early in the season when you get this, then you're probably gonna wanna use the whole cucumber. But I'm gonna start by just slicing it. So now that I have my cucumbers diced, I only needed about half my cucumber, so it looks like I can slice that up and get it ready for my lunchbox. So I'm gonna take my cucumbers and I'm going to put it into my salad bowl. And now the next thing I'm gonna add is cherry tomatoes. Now you can use cherry tomatoes, you can use grape tomatoes, whatever you'd like. The only thing you need to do is it gets a little overwhelming if you don't slice them. It's a little too much tomato in my opinion. So I'm gonna take and I'm gonna half these. Now that I've got my tomatoes sliced, I'm just gonna add those. And then the last vegetable, well, I guess I don't really know if an olive's a vegetable or not, but the last thing I'm gonna add is 2/3 of a cup of Kalamata olives. Now, I take the easy way out because I really don't enjoy pitting olives, so I buy these already sliced and pitted for me. So I'm just gonna dump those in. And now I think we're to the point where I'm gonna switch over and I'm going to use a pair of tongs, and I'm gonna start coating all of these in the dressing. My next step, before I add my pasta to my salad, I'm going to take a lemon and I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of lemon juice, just to add some brightness and some acidity in there. And then I'm gonna stir it one more time. And now to this, we're gonna move this front and center because now we're to the point where we're just gonna put together our finishing touches. So in here, I have 12 ounces of pasta. And with this salad, you could make it with pasta, you could make it with couscous. I personally like it better with couscous, but I'm keeping this family friendly, and I'm really the only one in my family that likes couscous. So when I make this again for myself, I'll do it with couscous. It's the same portions, you just take and switch it out with couscous instead. And the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to take 6 ounces of feta cheese, put that in, and I'm gonna fold it all together. So I'm gonna gently fold in the cheese. I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator to chill down nicely. And by the time it reaches that perfect cold salad temperature, our chicken should be done in the oven and our bread should be ready to eat. While we've been making our chicken and our delicious pasta salad, our dough's been resting under our lucky pizza towel. So it's been sitting there for 2 hours. The nice thing about this dough is you can let it sit for 2 hours. You could let it sit for longer if you're busy with other things. The dough can actually sit comfortably on the counter for up to 5 hours. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take our dough and we're going to transfer it over to our baking sheet. And what I've done is I've got this little cushion of flour. This is a crusty bread dough, so this is the perfect setting for it. So I'm actually gonna make 3 small loaves. So what I'm gonna do is kind of cut a peace sign into my bowl, and that's gonna start breaking down this dough for us. And when you do that, you're gonna see that it's starting to deflate. I've got this other bowl of flour here because I'm gonna sprinkle some on the top. I'm also gonna rub some into my hands. It's still pretty sticky because, believe it or not, we're only partway through that resting point. So I'm gonna grab those little bits of dough, sprinkle some more on the underside, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna smush it into a ball and compact it together. And now I'm gonna pull the dough so that it starts to make a small ball, and plop her on my tray and let gravity kick in and slowly spread it. Grab it, pull it, and tuck it. Sounds like a bad 90s rap. Grab it and pull it and tuck it. Okay. Now, if I were to just put this in the oven like this, it would be really dense. We're gonna cover it back up again with our pizza towel for another 40 minutes, but before we do that, I'm gonna grab my knife and I'm gonna cut some slits. And the reason I'm doing that is then, as this dough begins to rise, it will expand and it will let some of that steam escape while it's in the oven. So I'm just gonna grab my knife and make 3 little slices, just like this. Cover it up for 40 minutes, and then after 40 minutes, I'm gonna put it into a 400-degree oven. And inside of that 400-degree oven, I have a broiler pan. And with that broiler pan, I'm going to add 1 cup of water. So after I have that 1 cup of water in there, I'll slide in my pan of bread. I'll let it cook for 20 to 25 minutes in that 400-degree oven, and we'll be ready to eat. So we have one of our finished loaves sitting here and cooling and ready to be eaten. But while that would be delicious, let's amp it up a little bit with some honey butter. So here's how my family makes honey butter. We start with 1 stick of butter, and I just take my fork, and I break off little chunks into little, maybe tablespoon-sized scoops. And then to that bit of butter in my bowl, I'm going to add some salt. This is 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to take and add honey to it. Now you can do this to taste. In here, I have about 2 tablespoons of honey. And now all I'm going to do is simply take my fork and I'm going to mash and combine this all together. And by doing this, it will sweeten up and it will enhance that honey flavor that's inside of that loaf of bread. So it's just something a little more festive, a little more exciting. And if you want to, you can mix this up ahead of time and you can have it chilled, or you can just leave it at room temperature so that it's easy to spread on there. But like I said, this bread is warm, so it's gonna melt right into it. You can see it doesn't change the texture of the butter, so if you've never had honey before, this would be a bad episode for you, or maybe an exciting one. If you've never had honey butter before, the color gets a little richer, but it doesn't change the texture. So we are ready. We have all 3 of our parts of dinner. Let's plate it up and see what it looks like. So we have a delicious honey spread in front of us. So let's plate this up and see how delicious our dinner turned out. So if we think back, we have our honey mustard chicken and it looks absolutely delicious. The best part is you don't need any dipping sauce because it's already on there. And then we have our Mediterranean honey salad. So we have those great noodles, the cucumbers, the tomatoes, the Kalamata olives, everything in there absolutely delicious with some feta cheese. Ooh, that looks a little shy on some of those tomatoes, so let's add that in. And then we also have our delicious no-knead honey bread. And on top of that, we'll put a little bit of our delicious honey butter. So we'll smear that across the top. We're ready to eat. So remember, the apron might be optional, but the flavor isn't. Everybody clap your hands.